Today we're going to look at one of the healing stories in the Gospel of Mark. It's a story actually within a story. The story that introduces what we're about to hear is the story of Jairus. He was a leader of the synagogue, and he comes to seek out Jesus because his daughter is on her deathbed. And it's critical. She could die at any moment, and the only one who can save her is Jesus. And so Jairus goes and finds Jesus, and he tells this story to Jesus, and a crowd gathers around, and then they start immediately to just go off to Jairus' house so that they could attend to his daughter. And as they are going, Jesus gets interrupted. Now, I realized as I was working on my sermon for today that I never came back to the story of Jairus, so just so you aren't spending the whole sermon wondering, will the Jairus daughter live or die? Jesus' power is such that Jairus' daughter did die, but even though Jesus was interrupted and he attends to this other need, he was able to bring her back to life. So, for the story within a story, let's listen to it from Mark chapter 5.
Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately, her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you? How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease."
She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but yet grew worse. There is an entire novel in that sentence, a lifetime of pain and loneliness and hopelessness. She was an untouchable. The gospel simply tells us that she suffered from some kind of bleeding that had gone on for 12 years or more. The rabbis called it an unnatural flow of blood. And in those days, when a man or a woman had an unnatural flow of blood, they were ritually unclean. They had a religious problem. Being unclean, think of it like being contagious. Everything this woman touched would become unclean. The bed on which she slept, the dishes out of which she ate, the people she accidentally came in contact with. Jewish law said that if you were unclean, you had to separate yourself from everyone until whatever it was that made you unclean was gone, was taken care of, or was healed, so that you wouldn't contaminate anyone else. That's why lepers lived outside of town. When they came into town, they actually had to announce their presence so that anyone who wanted to protect themselves from possible contagion could get out of the way. So what that meant for this woman was that for 12 years, no one touched her. No one kissed her. No one hugged her. No one put their hand on her shoulder. Even at home, she was isolated. She couldn't even eat out of the same bowls as her family. She really shouldn't go out in public, because what happens if she should accidentally brush against someone and pass on her unclean state to them? Then there were elaborate rituals that they would have had to have gone through before they were clean again and thus able to socialize with others and participate in the religious rituals. So, for 12 years, she was confined to her home and pretty much banished from the community. And yet, look at what she did. When she heard that Jesus was in town, she broke all the taboos. She left her isolation. She left her house. She got dressed, probably tried to disguise herself so no one would really realize who she was. And then she went out into a crowd of people. She did the unforgivable. She dared to reach out and deliberately touch the clothes of another person. She knew full well what she was doing and the consequences for that. But her need was so great that she risked discovery and she risked death to touch Jesus' clothes. It's no wonder Jesus noticed that something had happened, because this wasn't a generic or accidental touch. It wasn't just, someone brushing by. It was a touch born of a deep need to be healed. What needs healing in your life? What is that deep wound you've been carrying that you've never been able to get rid of, that you have kept hidden away from others? Is it a shame from your childhood or youth? Is it something that stops you from being able to participate with others without being ridiculed, physical illness or disability? Is it something that makes people look at you, or would make people look at you with pity if they only knew about it? Is it something that would cause others to want to keep a distance from you? Many of those wounds are physical and visible, but of course, the deeper wounds are invisible to everybody but ourselves. Last week, Linda and I spent several days at a workshop, and we were looking at the Enneagram. The Enneagram, it's one of many tools just to help people understand themselves better and how they walk through this world in which we live. There are 9 types on the Enneagram, and each one speaks to a different wound that we have carried since childhood. Messages we have heard or experiences we've had very, very early on in life. You don't matter. You don't count. You can't make mistakes. You have to be perfect, or you're not worth it. You're not of value. You have to prove your worth. You have no value just by yourself. Everyone is capable of betraying you. These are wounds that we carry deep within us. And we may not even know where they came from, but we recognize them in ourselves. Each of us carries wounds within us that no one has ever seen. Scars from the past, painful memories, aches from unmet needs, griefs from losses, dashed hopes. Messages from those we loved that let us know that we really weren't that lovable just as ourselves. The physical, visible wounds are painful in themselves, but it's these hidden wounds that are the most painful and the most debilitating and the most isolating. They tend to be the ones that cause us to push people away and keep them at a distance lest they discover our wound, our shame. They tend to be the ones that have us stop. They tend to be the ones that stop us from letting others know who we are, because they might see that wound. They might see how imperfect and unlovable we are. They tend to be the wounds that we can't even talk about, even with those who are closest to us. I don't know if this woman ever could have talked about the incredible loneliness she must have felt in her life for those 12 years. And I'll bet some of you have wounds that are so deep that you've never told the person you're sitting next to, even if you've been married to them for 40 or 50 years. You keep it in the dark. We keep them hidden. We keep them unseen. And yet they're always there. They are hard to speak of, but they're also the things we most need to have healed if we are ever truly going to live the life that we were made for. Those are the things, those wounds that we use to keep distance between us and others, those things that we want no one else to touch because they might break open those wounds. Those are the very things that we need to have healed. So there she is, this unclean woman who'd been ill for 12 years, who tried literally everything and nothing worked. She spent all the money she had. She went to every doctor she could think of. She tried every home remedy that her friends said she should try, and absolutely nothing worked. And she was alone, lonelier than I don't think we could even articulate. And yet there she was, daring to hope that Jesus could heal her. Moving through the crowd, she got closer and closer to Jesus. Finally, she's just barely close enough. With one quick last look around, she reaches out and she touches clothes. She touches the coat that he wears. Now, one of the things that catches me in this story is, we all know the power of healing touch and the importance of touch to bring healing to our lives. But as I look at this story and this woman's courage to reach out and touch Jesus, that's the thing. She touched Jesus. Jesus didn't touch her. Jesus stopped in his tracks. He noticed something had happened and he said, "Who touched me?" Again, a strange question. He was in a crowd of people. No doubt many people had brushed up against him, but her touch was different. It was the touch of someone who had given up all hope and yet who still dared to hope. What courage. To be blunt, she had more courage than probably most of us. To risk being found out. Author Max Lucado said she had a crazy hunch and a high hope that Jesus could heal her. A crazy hunch and a high hope. Sometimes I think that's all we have. It's crazy hunches and high hopes. But isn't that what faith is? Jesus told her her faith had made her well. A woman who'd given up hope, and her faith had made her well. I know when we're really hurting, it can be hard to hope at all. Imagine being told you have incurable stage 4 lung cancer and there's literally nothing anybody can do. Imagine being so lonely that you are isolated and alone, even in a crowd of people all the time. Maybe you've experienced the loss of a spouse, and there's an emptiness that just will not be filled or healed. Maybe you're living on the edge and your safety net has fallen away. What are you going to do? Sometimes things are too hopeless for us to even entertain the idea of hope. But this woman with no hope heard about Jesus, and against all reason, she dared to have a crazy hunch and a high hope. That's faith. Lucado puts it this way: faith is the belief that God is real and that God is good. Faith is a choice to believe that the one who made it all hasn't left it all and still sends light into shadows and responds to genuine gestures of faith. Against all hope, she chose to believe that Jesus might actually heal her. And then she actually dared to act on that belief. She didn't just say, I believe Jesus can heal me, and then sit there and wait for it to happen. She got up, she got dressed, she went out into the crowd, she risked discovery, she sought out Jesus, and she reached out to him and touched him. Now, I think she would have been thrilled if God had actually healed her 12 years earlier. No doubt she'd prayed about it and asked for it. I have no doubt that she would have been thrilled if God would have healed her 6 years earlier while she was still hiding out in her house. Takes the pressure off, doesn't it? If God comes to us all the time, if God takes all the initiative, if God just takes care of it like that. No risk. But healing happens usually in response to us doing something. It was only when she left her home and when she reached out that Jesus' power flowed into her and she was healed. So I was thinking about this aspect of the story. I began to wonder, does God ever do anything without an act of faith on our part? I looked through the healing stories in the New Testament and the miracle stories in the Old Testament, and it seems like always there's a gesture of faith involved. Sometimes it was a very bold call on God to hear. Sometimes it was a simple plea. Sometimes it was going and doing what was being told. It's like, go wash yourself in the river 7 times. But it seems that the healing was always this mixture of a choice to act in faith and hope, and then God responds. Now, I do believe God still acts without gestures of faith. I believe God's power is always available to us, and God is always wanting to help us. But I take seriously what Jesus said to this woman, your faith has made you well. Your choice to hope, your choice to act, your choice to believe. That was a part of her healing. Now, please do not hear this as me saying that if you're not healed of something important, that your faith is too small, that you don't have enough faith. That is a terrible misuse of Scripture. Remember, Jesus is the one who said, all you have to do is have faith the size of a mustard seed and you can move mountains. Have you seen how small a mustard seed is? What Jesus was saying in that saying there was that you don't have to have a lot of faith. You don't have to be a powerhouse of faith for God to respond. It could be just a glimmer and just a hope. And I think there are times where there isn't even that much, and God answers. But what faith does is it helps us see possibilities. Faith is the hope that healing is possible and then daring to act on that hope. Doesn't mean, of course, that the healing we get is always what we ask for. I have a friend who has a very strong faith, honestly, a faith that I think puts mine and others to shame. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor said she basically had about 6 months to live. Now, my friend and her mother did not have a very good relationship. It was very strained. You could even say it was a fully broken relationship. But she still loved her mother, and so, of course, she still prayed for God to heal her mother. Well, about 4 months later, her mother passed away. But before she died, my friend and her mother had the most profound 4 months of their lives. They found a way to come back together. They found a way to move beyond the brokenness that had marred their relationship for so many years. And they found a way to love each other again. My friend would tell you that she may not have got the healing she asked for, but she got something a whole lot better. But you know something? It still took faith on her part. It still took that glimmer of hope that God was there and God would do something and God would respond. And so it was God in the midst of them that brought about the healing of their relationship. I doubt that it would have happened if my friend had not had the courage and the boldness to ask for God's healing and then embrace the opportunity that was offered. I think that's as much faith as belief is. Faith is a crazy hunch and high hope that Jesus can do something. It wasn't the people who stayed home who were healed. It was the ones who got dressed and went out into the crowds and who reached out to touch Jesus' coat. What do you need healed? Where do you need Jesus' power at work on your behalf? Maybe you need healing for a disease, maybe healing of a relationship. Maybe your work situation has become so isolated that it saps everything from you and you can't imagine having to go there day after day after day, and it just kills your spirit. Maybe your marriage is starting to fray at the edges. Maybe you're carrying a spiritual wound that is never healed. Whatever you are suffering from, don't stay where you are and expect somebody else to fix it. Get up, get dressed, and dare to touch Jesus' coat. Dare to offer him your wounds. You may be surprised at how he responds. Dare to have the faith that God answers prayers, the spoken ones and the prayers that are lived out by reaching out to grab hold of Jesus. Healing will come. I pray that you have the eyes to see it, because it may not look like what you're asking for. And I pray you'll have the courage to embrace it.